AI in Microsoft 365 is moving really fast. You get Copilot, Copilot Studio, agentic AI, and governance, and there's just a lot of stuff. And I'll be honest, I've kind of felt like I've been chasing the train. So today, I've got Graham Hosking, AI and data security expert for Microsoft, to walk me and you through all of it. So you can kind of think of this as your guided tour from zero to hero in the world of Copilot and AI in the Microsoft stack. So let's get going. So we're just hot off the heels of Microsoft Build. Coming out of that, tons and tons of announcements. In general, tons and tons of buzz about AI and AI agents, Copilot, all that good stuff. What do folks need to know about the big changes that have really been happening in the Microsoft AI space over the last few months, Graham?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show, Rue. It's awesome to do this with you. There's been a ton of announcements over the last couple of weeks, actually, with Microsoft Build, especially from a developer front as well. My focus is more around the modern work and kind of biz apps areas of creating agents. And there's two types of agents, by the way, which is declarative and custom engine agents. So some of the announcements I think we will talk through is some big things are happening within the AI industry anyway, which is like agent to agent, that interoperability between not just two agents talking to each other, but being able to have like a Microsoft agent talking to a Google or an Amazon agent as well. So the same things that we saw back when the internet was flourishing, like how are all these different systems and websites all going to talk to each other? We're seeing some similarities, I think, with that as well. And it's great to see that there's this camaraderie of different stakeholders within the industries that are deciding this should be kind of the standard. And they're all coming together to decide, well, yeah, this is a standard that we should be working on. So how are we going to work together in order to achieve that? And we can talk about things like MCP, so Model Context Protocol, agent to agent, and the multi-agent capabilities that's coming into Copilot Studio.
Okay, wow, already tons and tons of bullet points springing to mind about things we need to pick apart. I guess let's let's spend a little bit of time going over the fundamentals. So, over the last few years, generative AI, boom, chat interfaces, ChatGPT obviously being the poster child of that. But really over the last few months, you've then had this rise in awareness of agentic AI, right? And this concept of the agents. So how specifically do we define an agent? And I guess, what does that look like in the context of the Microsoft ecosystem?
Yeah, that's an awesome question because, like you mentioned before we started the podcast, the rate of change with just AI has been enormous. And just like when ChatGPT came out and then AI was banted around on everything, even prior to ChatGPT, really, we were still talking about AI, but we were talking about other aspects of AI like predictive coding, machine learning, and none of that has gone away, by the way. And all of that came out of the UK back in like Milton Keynes. So if you've ever been to, I can't think of the name of the place at the moment, where the or Bletchley Park, that's what I'm talking about. If you think about Bletchley Park, which is the birthplace of AI, it's been around forever. But I think that the key difference is for people to understand now is agents, which is another term that's been bandied around alongside AI, can mean many different things as well. So when we're talking about it from a Microsoft sense, we're talking about agentic AI, where it's a combination of using all those different methods of AI and predictive coding, machine learning, all those different tools, but been able to have that orchestrated. So you have a brain in the middle, and this brain has got literally arms and legs, all these different tools and actions that it can call. But some of those actions can also be business process automation as well, which has been around for decades. So if there are certain things that you need in an agent that has to be very structured, you call out to those tools like within Power Platform that can go through those steps and have an outcome for you. But the idea of an agent is it's got this brain. So rather than going through steps like 1 to 5, it could decide in its plan that I've got all the information for step 1 and 2. There's no need for me to either go and flow through those steps programmatically. I can do it dynamically. And I think that's where the core of this comes in, is agents is a loose term that can use any application across or any service across the Microsoft stack. So whether you're sat in modern work and you're using the M365 Copilot, or you're using things like Foundry and Azure services or Power Platform, they can all come together to create these agents or multi-agents as well.
Hey folks, just a quick heads up. If you're planning to roll out Microsoft 365 Copilot, check out ThreatScape's Copilot Readiness Assessment. It's a quick but comprehensive and expert-driven way of making sure that you can avoid common security mistakes with Copilot. You'll find a link in the description. Let's get back to the interview. Right. So I guess maybe helping my novice type brain unpack that a little bit more, because you mentioned it is with this kind of stuff. When you mentioned logic apps and things like that, that's actually a fun one, because as an example, one of the new agents that's available under Security Copilot is something, I believe it's called the Conditional Access Gap Analyzer, something like that, right? And when I first heard about this, I kind of thought, well, wait a second, can that just be a logic app or some type of script that assesses gaps and things like that? But as I then started to understand more about this definition of agentic AI, it's like, well, the key difference is it has that, as you called it, quote unquote, brain that can kind of escape the confines of a narrowly defined set of logic rules and kind of make its own decisions and figure out its own stuff based on changes that a developer doesn't have to worry about. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say. Like with logic apps, it's just like Power Automate, right? There's a flow of different actions that it can take, or you can have a set of conditions or if statements. Like the principle is the same. So you could do the same within agentic AI. So if you have an automated process, a trigger that you have today. So from a threat perspective, it might be you have alert come in, that's your trigger. There may be some steps within that to collect additional telemetry. And then you want to be able to give it to an agent that has this specialism, these plans, these instructions to understand what it should do with that information. And it could be, well, of all the information you've given me, this is high severity. So I now need to log this within the SOC team, and it's on priority 1, high alert. I'm going to ping everyone through Teams. I'm going to email everyone because it's out of hours. But you can define that in the plan itself. So if the information has come in and it's not severe for various reasons that you've put in the plan, there's a different flow of steps that it can take dynamically, rather than having that hard coded, which we're traditionally doing like within logic apps or Power Automate. We're able to have that flexibility now, regardless of whether you're in the security world or modern work or you're a developer, you have these tools available to you.
Sure. Okay. The definition is improving for me. I'm going from low def to high def now. So I guess in the ecosystem of Microsoft and agentic AI, if I have ideas in my mind about, well, hey, here's a process that my organization does, my business unit does, maybe there's a use case for agentic AI there. How do you build these agents? Like, is it like a prompt book, or what does that kind of look like?
You know what? That is an awesome question, because I don't think anyone has figured that out yet. And the reason for that is because generative AI is very personal. When I'm selling M365 Copilot, we're talking about the productivity, how it's going to save you time, how it's going to do better things for you. But when we're talking about agentic AI, we have a couple of different ways that we can talk to customers about defining what that might be, what the solution might be. And that could be looking at it from a persona perspective, like me or my team do X, Y, and Z. This is an easy task for us as a human being, but it consumes quite a lot of time. So what do I mean by that? So I was with a customer last week. They said every year they have to spend 3 days in doing market research. So pretty easy task technically, because you're going out onto the web, you're collecting the information, then you're combining that with your internal information. And at the end of the 3 days, you've got a very nice report that you've had to sit down and write. I can't write for toffee. This is where I love generative AI, because I can give it the themes of the types of things that I want to get out of that report. So I can give it some examples. I can give it examples of how I've written certain articles in the past, and it's able to create that on the fly for me. And that's just like super awesome. But that use case with that particular customer, it took them 3 days. But using things like agents, like the new researcher and analyst agent, which is now generally available, by the way, that took 15 minutes. And that was just around crafting the prompt in the right way to gather the right information, surfacing up information that is internal to their organization. So you can have that, which is work grounding, but then given the instructions to go off to the internet. And then it took 15 minutes to scour the internet to find the relevant parts of the information that could fulfill that report. And then using the OpenAI models, so specifically like the O3 mini model, which is very good at understanding math and language, a very complex model as well. Using those specialisms then to take those bits and actually craft a very detailed, almost like dissertation report, because it's that detailed. But it isn't just text, it's giving you all of those visuals, all of those graphs, all of those kind of tables as well. So these models are awesome at understanding us as human beings, our natural language, but being multimodal, as in it isn't just text, it's actually creating images or voice or text or videos now, which is where I see the trajectory of all of this going. Like we've already seen in the AI industry, at least, is using generative AI, these models to control robots. Like it's very easy now to be able to articulate to an AI, this is exactly what I want you to do. Here's the plan again, the orchestration. You choose from that plan what you need to do. And it understands that. So we've seen like robots say, well, clean up the dishes, where the dishes go. Like, what do I do with this apple? Do I cut it? I've got a knife next to me. So it's starting to understand not the real world, but the concepts about language and how to reuse that language.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going off on PC. I really love this stuff.
No, it's great, and I love it. And so it's like, because the robotic example is quite interesting, because it's, number one, it's kind of mind blowing that we can even have this discussion. But number two, it's like, so it's almost like it's another layer of abstraction, right? Insofar as it lowers the barriers that I, as a creator, need to be aware of to then go away and create my things, right? I don't have to learn the program language for robots, because, hey, the AI-based solution can do that for me. That's the kind of direction of travel.
But your question originally was, how do you decide what it's good at? Right. So I started to talk about kind of persona based routes. That was that market research I was on about, but it might be particular business problems that you have today. And when you're building or deciding what these agents should do, these models, these agents are really going to be really good at things that you are really good at. And the reason for that is because you can write the instructions and the plan in the way that you understand. Just like having a new employee that comes in and you sit down with them and say, well, you've never done this before in your life. I have to tell you why we're doing it, how we do it, what we don't do, and what the expected outcome is. And it's a really different way, especially being in IT for many years now, to making something work by toggling on or off certain switches, to having to craft language to understand the instructions and the plan. And the reason why I say it's really good at stuff that you know, because you know and you understand what the output is. You understand all the complexities, you understand the outcome, the end article that you're trying to get to. But in between that, you're going to have many different tasks or actions or problems that you need to overcome. And I think the main issue that I still see is people and organizations just trying to boil the ocean, that AI can like automatically fix everything for them. And that's definitely not the case. But it's been able to take a subset of smaller tasks, usually easier ones, and been able to almost graph this. So I do a whiteboarding session where I go, well, what issues do you think the AI could fix? And they might come with an hour around kind of 50 different problems, or some customers 100. And we map these out and we say, well, yeah, these are kind of low hanging fruit. Yes, we've got some pre-built agents and go away and do this market research for you. Like top right, this can fix it tomorrow for you if you wanted to. And there's going to be more complex things where we have to sit down and figure out what are the pieces of the puzzle, all of the different tools that we need in order to solve that problem. But it's for another time. So we map all of these areas out, and then we have some items, maybe 10 items then that we can work on with them. And then that's where we're starting to use AI within them.
Yeah, gotcha. And I pick up one specific thing you mentioned there. You kind of mentioned that it's going to be very good at doing things that you're very good at doing, right? And really just doing them faster and on your behalf, because you know the exact way to prompt it, right? And it's funny you say that, because one thing that dawned on me recently was I'm increasingly finding that if I'm giving someone else instructions, right? So putting aside agentic for a second, human to human, old school style relationship, right?
Old school, yeah.
Old school, yeah, humans.
Traditional way.
I find myself increasingly, if I'm sending someone like a Teams message or an email, I almost feel like I'm prompt engineering that person, because I'm laying out very specifically how I want them to do something in the same way I would do that in some kind of prompt book, right? And so on that point, in terms of the other I guess, rebrand or brand or name that gets thrown out there a lot now is a Copilot Studio, right? So how, for someone that hasn't touched Copilot Studio before, but is interested in this kind of agentic AI solution building, how do these things play together?
Wow, how long have you got? So elevator pitch here is, as I mentioned, AI and agents is a very broad term. So think of Copilot Studio as another UI, another user interface to access an AI. And there's different UIs depending on what you want to create. Well, for example, you've got OneDrive for Business, right? You store your files in there, hopefully. So if you're working on a file, like you would create a new Word document, you would start working on that. You know that's stored safely within your OneDrive site. But if you wanted to share that out to someone, then you have the capability to do that. So within Microsoft, you have what's called declarative agents. Now, declarative agents are simple agents that can be grounded within SharePoint or OneDrive, for example, and it understands the information you've got access to. So you could create an agent that's specific to you, and you could share that out for others to use. So those are really simple agents. Now, these same declarative agents can be created within Microsoft Copilot Studio as well. But now within that UI, you can share this out to either a group of users properly and securely. Everything's secure, obviously, with these agents, but you can now have the administration overhead. So you can choose what groups of people or even the entire organization that could use these agents. And then you can have what's called an agent lifecycle of these. As and when certain elements of these agents change, like the underlying model or the instructions or its purpose, then you have a governance area around that to control them and keep them maintained. Now, another part of Copilot Studio is called custom engine agents. I mentioned this in the very beginning. And this is where you have a lot more tools, a lot more capabilities, and a lot more power. So instead of now just reasoning over like SharePoint or OneDrive data, you can look at line of business applications or custom connectors or model context protocol, MCP. So you can call out to all of these different resources and tools now. And then you gain access to Power Platform. So you can call out to Power Automate and a new functionality called Agent Flows, which is super cool. So rather than kind of sitting down in Power Automate to write a structured business process, you can now write it in natural language and it'll go and actually create that structure for you, which is awesome. The other misconception is because you're sat in a user interface, what you see is what you get, and that is not the case. So there's SDKs and there's toolkits for agents. So if you are building something and you want to do that all in pro code, you can light up Virtual Studio and start like programming these agents as well around the same governance piece. And then we can call out to other areas of the stack. Like I set a couple of demos up where I'm calling out to custom models or fine-tuned models, over in Azure AI Foundry. And then I can call that in as a repository then into Copilot Studio. So there's lots of functions and features, especially around using other models. So I've got other demos I show customers using the new Mistral OCR capabilities, which is like super awesome. If you've not seen that, go and have a read. And the reason why it's cool is I can call out to a non-Microsoft model, totally third party, all secured within Foundry. But now I have the power to be able to look at very detailed PDF files and not just read the text like an OCR normally would, but understands the nuance and the connection of any pictures that are within that PDF. And it creates a JSON structure of that. So say you've got a picture and it's explaining, the population of the world. It would understand where that picture is in context to the text, but also put that out in JSON. So I can reuse that in a structured way that when it goes back to my orchestrator, my plan, it understands how to reuse that structured data as well.
Very cool.
Yeah, there's like so many things that you can do within Copilot Studio that people just don't realize.
Very cool. And you mentioned, so one of the kind of later points you touched on there was this ability to use not just OpenAI / Microsoft models, but also these third-party models. And this is this where like Azure Foundry comes in? Is there your kind of gateway to managing those in the context of Copilot Studio?
Yeah, well, think of it as like a set of services, just like Microsoft 365, right? What do we use for email? We use Exchange, right? Exchange Online. And we know that sends emails and it stores information around Teams chats. But if we want to store files, then we don't store that in our mailbox, hopefully not. But we store that within SharePoint and OneDrive, and that's sat within SharePoint Online. So there's there's a couple of different services we use. And think of when you're calling out to these agents, you can use a set of services depending on the need and the want. So for AI Foundry, is 1,800 plus models that you can use today. But part of the build announcements was we announced our partnership for Grok. So Grok is now in there, and all of the models as well for Hugging Face. So we've got so many different models you can choose. And again, you're choosing the tool that you need for that appropriate agent. So rather than using, what's the biggest model out there at the moment?
4O or something,
Gemini,
right? Like just a generic
O3.
model. Yep.
Yeah. So rather than going in and choosing the best model, which isn't best practice, because that could be very costly and overkill for what you want to do, there might be some really small models that you want to use. So you could use like Mistral Small, and then you could call that in as part of your AI model to reason over the task that agent's trying to do. Does that make more sense?
It does.
But Azure has so many different functions, like there's just too many to talk about in this session. But there was a good one I saw, one of the build videos around document intelligence. So a bit like syntax. So they were going through a process where they had an invoice and they were able to structure that in a certain way. So it would output JSON again. We can reuse those sets of services that live in Azure, but be part of Copilot Studio as well.
So if I've already got that kind of thing up and running in my organization, I don't need to reinvent the full wheel. Is that the kind of point there?
Yeah. So you've always been able to call in Azure services because you can have customer connectors and REST APIs and all of that. So you've always been able to do it. But the announcements with Build was being able to make that more in the UI. So before you would create a custom connector, you'd need to have or know all of the endpoints, the API keys, all the ways you connect to those Azure services. But now using AI Builder, you're able to do a similar sort of configuration, but it's easier. So as and when you're creating those agents, you might have access to multiple models. So if you're doing a part of that model where it needs to do reasoning, it needs a reasoning model, then you can pick the model for that appropriate time. And everything else in that agent, if it's just answering questions back to the user, well, using a reasoning model is probably overkill again for that. So you want to use a cheaper, faster model. So it gives you that flexibility as well within the UI.
That's very cool. So as we've been having this discussion, one of the things that is echoing in the back of my mind, I need to revert to form here. We briefly spoke about governance on top of this kind of stuff, right? And the dubiety about the security of this kind of stuff, right? Because we've got that classic and natural tendency to say, well, number one, if I don't understand it, I don't want it. So let's shut it down entirely. But then number two, if shutting it down entirely isn't an option, which, hey, good luck doing that with all this stuff over time and still having a business in 5 years. If the cat's out the bag, what are, I guess, the biggest governance/security risks of the kinds of things we've spoken about? And then what are the solutions to those risks?
Yeah, again, that's a common question. I've got some customers that are very pro AI and they're just kind of leading the way. And I've got other customers that are like, we're not going to use any AI, whether it's Microsoft or not. So we've locked everything down. And I've got customers in between as well. Like they're using a series of different providers today, and they're just trying to figure out which one's the best. The reason that I give coming to Microsoft is you have underlining to all of this technology, whether it's Copilot or whether it's Entra or whether it's M365, it adheres to the same security, privacy, and compliance that all of our other services do as well. So that's the benefit of coming to Microsoft. And the misconception is because for M365, there are two versions. Like there's a paid version, which is the $30 per user per month. And then there's Copilot Chat, which is free. Like every licensed customer gets access to that, whether you're F1 up to E5. The misconception is because it's free, it doesn't come with the same protections and governance around it. So having to go in and train some of our customers about that. But when it comes to governance, it isn't just always around the security aspects of it, but it's also around the outputs from it. So there's data security enterprise protection that's built across any AI that you're using from Microsoft, whether it's Copilot Studio or M365 Copilot. But when it comes down to kind of the governance piece, the most common questions I get is around agent sprawl specifically. So customers are, I think, a bit more aware now that Copilot can reason over their work data securely. It doesn't have any more permissions than that they have. And it's also able to go out to the web securely as well. So it's not like it goes and retrains any models or trains Bing, for example, for web access. But the agent sprawl piece still comes up. And it really depends on where you're creating these agents. And people think that there's one way to create an agent, and that's not the case. There's like multiple ways of creating agents. And that causes a little bit of headache, I think, because depending on where you're creating the agent, depends on where you go to govern it. So the reason why I was talking you through that earlier on around declarative agents and custom engine agents is you're using the same capabilities in Power Platform to govern these agents as well. And it could be that you've just created an agent. It's going to be a new HR agent for people to ask about benefits or their leave or something else. So you want to be able to have governance around that when it comes to the application. So you want to have a dev test first, just like you do with any other application. And then you're going to have a production, and then you're going to have iterations of that. So that whole agent lifecycle piece is already wrapped into Power Platform already. You can choose all of the DLP controls within that as well. So if you don't want certain people to use certain connectors, like I've got one customer that wants to create an agent that doesn't want to look at SharePoint at all, like they've locked it out. Well, you can do that. There's the permissions and the capabilities to do it. Or there might be third-party connectors now that individuals could use and create. And again, we can have the same DLP policies in Power Platform that we can prevent that from accessing that information. What's the other thing that I usually get? Usually when we're creating more of the declarative agents in SharePoint, so you can create SharePoint agents, which is built into sites, by the way. And under the covers, that is a JSON manifest file. And it's just like any other file. Like if I create a Word or Excel file, it's the same thing, the same content that I can govern with Purview, DLP, through classifications, so we can monitor for those agent files and see who's using and accessing those. I don't know if are you familiar with DPSM? Am I saying that right?
Well, this will be
DSPM?
Purview DSPM, because you get Purview DSPM and then you get Purview DSPM for AI, which was previously AI Hub, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess this kind of thing interacts with Copilot Studio, right? And your various agents to help kind of govern the data security within them.
Yeah, so data security posture management for AI, DSPM,
Yes.
Get it right.
Rolls off the tongue.
It does, doesn't it? Is had a load of announcements at Build as well, but that's been out for quite a while. It used to be called the AI Hub, if you were familiar with that.
Yep.
So because all of the services and the telemetry in M365 is monitored and audited in a very granular level, it's actually filtering out the audit log, and it's able to look at who is using different agents, whether that's risky behavior, whether it's a prompt that's risky or the output from those prompts. And these things are just getting better and better. So it's built in for Copilot naturally, but people don't realize that if they decide that they want to use more of the ChatGPT enterprise capabilities, you can bring in third-party AI providers into that tool as well. So you're monitoring at the endpoint then using the Purview add-ins to monitor what's happening on those local machines, just like you would do in the security world, right? And then we can monitor for user interaction and output from that. So again, if you've not seen that, go and have a look at data security posture management for AI. You've probably already got access to it if you're an E5 customer, and just make sure that's turned on, doing your due diligence on monitoring for potential risk, especially with corporate information.
Absolutely, yeah. And one thing I know that you can, so as an example, if you are going to start rolling out DSPM for AI, there's an extension that you kind of roll out to the various browsers like Firefox, Chrome, and I think Edge as well actually needs the extension. And it'll tell you, it'll say, hey, here's all the generative AI traffic and transactions that are happening across even things you don't manage, which is the really cool part.
Yeah, you're right. The Purview agent, another agent that needs to be, or add-on needs to be installed. There's kind of many things. So if you've heard of like endpoint DLP, data loss prevention, so that's another intermediary way of monitoring for potential risk. So that risk isn't just like blocking at the end of the day for DLP. That might be the end goal, but you're either having it in a monitoring mode, so it's transparent to the end user, but you're surfacing up that risk either from an AI perspective or for potential loss of data, or other means that you need to monitor for as well. Or you could go to the next stage and have monitoring or blocking, but with a business justification. Like, we've stopped you from doing this really risky thing, so we can have more of an adaptive approach to data security. And high risk things might be block, hard block, or it could be provide a business justification of why you're sending this really important information out to the internet, please, or onto your personal OneDrive account.
That's a really good point, actually. And it's a capability I really like if you're doing a DLP project, because it lets you gradually ramp up the protection without the really high risk that, hey, you're going to kill some kind of business process, right? And a lot of folks out there, they just want to get the job done. And if you hit one person of influence with a block rule, that can be a resume generating event, right? Or it can maybe result in a whole bunch of good intended data security processes just being completely shut down because, hey, you're stopping me doing my job. So the warn mode, which is like block with override, really, really cool and useful capability.
It is, yeah. And it will take a while as well to roll out that blocking. I think some customers just think that you can just hit block and everything be okay, but you don't realize, unless you've looked very closely, what business processes you might be stopping someone doing. So having that monitoring in place, especially with AI as well, allows you to see what's the lay of the land, what are people doing today, and then what do we need to deem as potential risk from that, rather than just going into hard block, which some customers do, of course. But you might be doing this over a series of months to get as much information and telemetry as possible before you make a business decision to do it. I think that's the important bit. It's a business decision, not an IT decision.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that's kind of came up a lot as we've been discussing Copilot and agents is the Power Platform. And one of the things I'm really interested in, having not particularly been close to Power Platform as a whole, one of the things that's kind of bumbling away in the background as a new part of the nomenclature is vibe coding, right? And I think this is the first time I've actually said vibe coding on the podcast. But for folks who who have played around with GitHub Copilot or Cursor, if you're like me and you come from a background of no coding experience, using those tools is life-changing. And it's really, number one, it's just fun. And number two, it makes you realize, oh, wait a second, what was previously the skill barrier has, while it's not gone, it's been lowered.
Yeah, it has.
So one of the things that comes to mind for me is I think of Power Platform as low-code solutions. I think of Power Apps as being low-code solutions to build business applications, right? In a vibe coding world, where does Power Platform sit? Does it kind of reduce the need for these low-code solutions, or does it just improve them?
Well, having done quite a bit of vibe coding myself, I think that you're totally right. It does lower the barrier to that skill set. So I see a future, before we jump into that, kind of a future where the things that we originally thought was hard, or we had to spend many years in perfecting that skill, like coding, I've not got a coding background by any means, has definitely been lowered. So things that were hard are going to be easy for us now. And there's going to be new things that are going to be like super, super hard that will need an AI or other specialisms and skills to do. So that's one piece. I've built a few different apps as well. So if you're used to using, or if you do use like Home Assistant, I've got many add-ons and other things onto that I've built using AI. So going back to your original question, Copilot and Power Platform, like, do you think it's a vibe coding piece? I think a little bit. It is low code. There's also some pro code elements that you and I could probably do as well with the use of AI. Like, I know what JSON is, for example. I know how the structure should look, but I couldn't write it blindfolded. I use AI in order to help me decipher what the structure should be, or whether that's the best way of actually performing that individual task. And there's a really good build video as well I was watching this morning. I've been up since 3 this morning for no particular reason other than not sleeping. So I watched 3 hours of build content, which still didn't put me to sleep. I found it really interesting. And there was a video on there about vibe coding and being pro to vibe coding as well, but having the right structure behind it. And I think that's the answer to your question is you and I will continue to do this because we have a new skill that we haven't been able to do before. I find it awesome. But we also need to either have those skills so we know how to structure it properly, especially if it's going into enterprise, or in the future, I see other AIs talking to AIs, making sure that we've got the right structure, the right process, the right kind of governance around. And that's where you're starting to see more of those multi-agent workflows that's coming in, the agent to agent standardization. Like this has to come in because everybody's going to be doing it soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And a big part of that is something you touched on right at the start of this podcast, which is MCP, right? This is, I believe, Anthropic's kind of standard that's since really been adopted by the rest of the industry. Microsoft have adopted it. I believe OpenAI have also adopted it. So from a security perspective, you kind of look at the headlines of MCP, and I look at some of the honestly really cool stuff that is out there. Like I look at Merrill Fernando's MCP server, Loca, which allows you to interact with the Graph API. Really, really cool. Really, really scary as well,
Yes,
at least
indeed.
from an initial view. So what do kind of security pros need to know about MCP?
Well, it
Big sigh.
was first designed because it's a big topic as well. Because there's a couple of elements to it. Is MCP is a new standard from Anthropic. I think they came out with it back end of last year. There's a lot of organizations, including Microsoft now, that have that generally available. So you can use that. I think the downside is, from a security perspective, is anyone can create an MCP server. So think of MCP as like this middleware in between an agent or a client and an API or resource behind the scenes. So I've actually created some MCP servers myself as well. Whether that is best practice or not, I don't know. But I'm having to put API keys, for example, in certain places. The technology will talk to each other. So making sure that that's not like hard coded, for example. So if you're a vibe coder and you've never done any coding before and you're hard coding these things, please like take it down. But there has to be some security and governance around that as well, because MCP servers can link out to other resources on the internet, but also internally as well. So there's some security implications that need to be considered there.
Gotcha. And maybe one final thing to pick your brains on, you just mentioned that. You mentioned that I think you said you created some NPC servers of yourself.
Yes.
For the absolute novice, what does that look like? Like, what does that involve? Because it sounds pretty heavy. Hey, you've also mentioned that you're not exactly an expert coder. So what's involved with that type of thing?
Yeah, so I started it as a bit of a learning curve. I heard of MCP from Anthropic purely because I do quite a lot of home automations using Home Assistant. And MCP was mentioned there where you could use Claude in order to talk to your house. And I was like, cool. Like, this just sounds like something that's really up my street. So understanding like the connectivity between a secure on-prem server in the house and then this AI that sits out with Anthropic Claude out on the internet. I wanted to understand the security and the connectivity. So I thought it would be really cool if I could understand how these servers work and how to create them. So I also wanted to create a bit of a showcase as well from a work perspective. So I created an MCP server, which sits in Azure as a web app. So it's code, by the way, but it's fairly simple code, as in you're telling this service on how it should run, how it connects out to different APIs. In my case, it was going to be Perplexity. I wanted to show how you could bring Perplexity into Copilot Studio, just because you can, and then how the security worked through the API keys and then the interface into Copilot Studio. So it took probably about an hour or two coding from scratch, vibe coding from scratch, but using some examples from Anthropic. And then within Copilot Studio, you can use this as a tool. So you say, well, here's the Swagger file, so the OpenAI template about how to connect to the Azure Web Service. You give it some metrics around that about how it should connect, what the URI is to that web service. And that's it. And then the web service is like this middleware in between your connection, your tool, and then the APIs that are available then through Perplexity. So it's pretty easy. I do have it on my GitHub as well. I probably should share that if you want to see an example. Like if it's not best practices, I'm really sorry. But, it's something you can create. Like you said, development now is really a low barrier to entry for anyone to do. And it's going to be the future. So just like new protocols came out when the internet did, we've got new protocols now for AI and how they interact. So you've probably heard of, I'm going to get this wrong, NL Web. So a new way of being able to get AI to surf the internet. Have you seen that?
Right? No, go on.
So in simple terms, when we search the internet or we go to our browser of choice and we go to our search engine, then it's looking at an index. So it's trying to index whole pages. So NL Web, if I'm getting that right, is being able to have a way of extracting just the information that you need, but it's in JSON. So if you were looking for a pair of trainers, for example, so some Adidas trainers, and you want this specific color, this size, it's the website's only bringing back the JSON for that specific size of that product. And just
So you
the
don't
snippet
you
of
don't need to
JSON.
scrape the whole thing, therefore performance optimization.
Exactly. So it's optimizing websites for AI use in a structured data way.
Jeez. Well, I mean, tell you what, we were joking before podcast that we could probably go on for 2 hours. We could, but time is against
Indeed,
us.
yeah.
We should do this again sometime. Just kind of get up to speed
Love
on what
that.
the latest developments are. And I guess you mentioned you've got some cool stuff on GitHub there. If folks want to see that, or if they want to find you in general online, where should they head?
Yeah, probably the best place for me is LinkedIn. So look me up, Graham Hosking on LinkedIn under Microsoft. For GitHub repo, it's going to be IT Specialist 111 for no other reason. A very old handle, but there's some really cool projects I'm working on for home automation. Everything in my house is like fully automated, which is the stuff that I do outside of work. But there's also some work pieces on there as well, like the MCP server for Perplexity, which is a bit of a showcase of what the art of the possible is.
Awesome. Love it. Well, Graham, had a hell of a time interviewing you. Really appreciate it. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you very much.